Buonasera e bentrovata chi è fisicamente presente oggi in sala all'Istituto Bruno Leoni, bentrovati a chi ci segue invece nelle nostre dirette sui canali social dell'Istituto Bruno Leoni. Oggi abbiamo una opportunità davvero importante per noi. I'm going to introduce this in Italian and then we will switch to English. Abbiamo un'opportunità importante per noi perché ci consente di parlare con una persona che definire informata dei fatti sarebbe un delicato eufemismo di un tema che è assolutamente centrale per l'Europa e per le prospettive della crescita economica. Il nostro ospite è Thomas Hazlett, che è professore di economia alla Clemson University, è autore di un numero indefinito di saggi e articoli sia di ricerca sia divulgativi su quotidiani e su siti dedicati al vasto pubblico. È un supereroe dell'analisi economica del diritto, nel senso che con le sue ricerche ha contribuito sia a far procedere la disciplina, sia a tradurre gli insegnamenti degli economisti in soluzioni di policy, e si è occupato nel corso della sua carriera, tra i tanti temi, dei temi legati all'evoluzione del mondo delle telecomunicazioni e delle comunicazioni digitali. Lo ha fatto essendo tra i primi a proporre di passare da sistemi di allocazione, diciamo così, amministrativa delle frequenze radiofoniche, televisive e per i telefoni cellulari a meccanismi di asta, come poi è accaduto negli Stati Uniti, in Europa e in molti altri paesi del mondo, e successivamente si è occupato e si sta tuttora occupando di come l'evoluzione dell'economia digitale, di come l'avvento delle grandi piattaforme cambia lo scenario competitivo e anche di come le autorità antitrust stanno reagendo a queste evoluzioni. In particolare si è occupato e si sta occupando, ed è questo il tema del dibattito di oggi, di come la natura della competizione nel mondo digitale cambia e può far cambiare il modo in cui vengono regolamentati questi settori. Il cambiamento, diciamo, questo tipo di innovazione, buona o cattiva che sia, lo vedremo, si sta facendo strada sia negli Stati Uniti sia in Europa. In Europa, dove ci piace dire che siamo leader globali nella regolamentazione, e probabilmente è vero, ma non è detto che sia un complimento, abbiamo approvato 2 regolamenti l'anno scorso che sono entrati in vigore da pochi mesi, che sono il Digital Services Act, che riguarda il comportamento e la tutela del consumatore diciamo da parte delle piattaforme online, e il Digital Markets Act, che invece introduce una nuova tipologia di regolamentazione ex ante rivolta ai grandi soggetti che operano su internet. Anche negli Stati Uniti c'è un dibattito di questo tipo, è in corso un dibattito di questo tipo, che ha ricevuto uno stimolo, una spinta, dopo l'elezione del presidente Joe Biden, dal modo in cui la Casa Bianca ha affrontato i temi di antitrust e i temi della regolamentazione digitale, in primis attraverso alcune nomine. La più importante è quella di Lina Khan, che è un economista che si era occupata di questi temi con una prospettiva molto forte a capo dell'antitrust americana. Thomas Hazlett è stato diciamo, economista, uno studioso, è stato capo economista dell'equivalente americano del nostro garante delle comunicazioni, della Federal Communications Commission. Si sta occupando del tema, ha scritto diversi paper, di cui uno lo segnalo, poi lo renderemo disponibile nei nostri nella descrizione del nostro video sui nostri canali, che si intitola US Antitrust Policy in the Age of Amazon, Google, Microsoft, Apple, Netflix and Facebook, e oggi parlerà di questi temi cercando di mettere assieme la prospettiva americana con la prospettiva europea. Nel cedergli la parola passo all'inglese, quindi smetto di parlare una lingua che grosso modo conosco. Carlo actually said many flattering things. So, don't worry. Let me
take issue with that.
Yeah, we will. So let me switch to English. I was saying that your research interests and your and the impact, the policy impact of your research has had to do with the number of topics ranging from the regulation of radio spectrum and radio spectrum auctions to how competition is changing in the digital world, and finally to how regulation is addressing these changes, both in the United States and in Europe. Today's seminar starts from the Digital Markets Act, the DMA, which is the most important and in many ways groundbreaking regulation which has been introduced in Europe, but which is also at the center of a heated debate in the United States, especially after Joe Biden's entrance in the White House and his nominees, in particular Lina Khan. So I leave you. I was also saying that you have published a number of research articles, including this one in constitutional political economy. So I think I've spoken way too much, and I leave you the floor. Thank you very much for being here at Istituto Bruno Leoni.
Thank you kindly for all those nice words in Italian. And I would speak in Italian, but we've been here in the country for almost 2 weeks. I'm kind of tired of speaking in Italian. Arrivederci. See, I'm bilingual. So I'll speak in American for the talk. Yeah, the title may not be so clear at this moment, but the subtitle, the European Union and the Digital Markets Act, an American perspective, is maybe more straightforward, and you'll understand the rest of the title with crystal clarity in just a moment. The way I set this up, I'm operating on the rule that an expert is anyone from at least 1,000 miles away. So this is an American perspective. I've come over the ocean. I must know something to travel this distance and speak at the esteemed Institute Bruno Leoni. So I'm happy to be here, and thank you. And thanks to Professor, excuse me, full Professor Alberto Mingardi. And that is a great honor. And I won't make any of those full professor jokes that are customary as such later in the evening, perhaps, when the liquid is flowing. But it's a wonderful thing to be here, and to be here particularly at the Bruno Leoni Institute. I did read Freedom and the Law some years ago. I think it was 1986. And it's certainly a formative work, and the standing of this institute to be built on the shoulders of one of the giants of classical liberal thought is something I like to keep in mind. Now, I have been to the Institute a couple of times before, and I think Carlo remembers that. He invited me back nonetheless, although it has taken a few years. There was an interregnum there. A pandemic, okay. So it's not to be taken. But I don't know if you're actually aware of this, that I have previously. I was here. In fact, are you aware of this?
I am.
We turn that up.
Don't they? All right, now, boys. Since you've been doing so good, today we're going to move right up to signaling. An exciting venture into the world. Don't applaud, boys. Now, in signaling, you'll note that we send various letters by placing the flags in various positions. Now, for instance, this is A. This is B. This flag is missing. I had two of them. See, you used two when you... Well, I must have left it down below. I'll get it. It won't take me but a minute. Now, you boys won't go away like you did yesterday, will you? All right, because remember, a scout is trustworthy. Well, he's trustworthy, too. Several things.
Perbacco, how long did this go on? I know one thing. It would have taken more than a minute to find the flag.
Did you hear the Italian? Do you know who that is?
That's you.
You didn't see that? We'll play it again.
Hey, look, all these garbage cans.
Those aren't garbage cans, dummy. They're ash cans. Here, I show you how it works.
Hey, get down, you're down. Make room for me. It's a Jerry's.
It was not the Germans, it was...
Hey, don't tell me you kids. Now look, you guys. Don't you realize that somebody could have...
What was that? Oh, murder.
Chuck, what the devil happened? It was one of those...
Anyway, that's McHale's Navy. The first time I was in Italy. You didn't
The one without the act.
you didn't see this one?
The one without the act.
Yes. Tommy Hazlett. Maybe that's why you didn't recognize me. Tommy Hazlett. And that was a TV series. It wasn't a real show. I mean, it wasn't a real actual appearance in World War II. But it was the McHale's Navy was a popular TV show anyway. So that's the first Italian I attempted. You see how it went. So that's full disclosure. Do you want me to keep going with my academic talk, or is that it? Okay. Get back on track here. Good. My first visit to Italy. That was at Universal Studios, by the way, in North Hollywood, which you can visit if you go to Los Angeles. So I want to talk about the new economy and the regulation thereof. And this is a hot topic in Europe with the Digital Markets Act. And of course, other regulations on privacy and the use of antitrust law as well. But the basic idea, we're living in a world that is rapidly changing, and the exciting new opportunities that have developed, some might say enveloped our society over the last few decades, they of course emerge under traditional rules. The idea of common law and regulatory institutions that have been developed for a previous epoch. And this is the way it always happens. The laws don't adjust before something new happens. And sometimes that something new forces a lot of change in the law to deal with new challenges and opportunities. Now, the United States and the European Union, of course, very interesting to study in tandem as well as individually, because we have so much in common, similar institutions and traditions in many respects, and certainly success in economics. We have common markets, we have income levels, so we seem to be comparable in many ways, but of course there are the distinctions, and it doesn't take long to see how the politics, the law, and the economic interests might change between the two. So it's very useful to look around and to see what's happening. I don't have to tell you this, everybody knows this. Regulators themselves always want to travel from one venue to the next to see how things are going. Of course, one of the exciting things in the post-war period is that Asia has opened up as a challenge to the United States and to Europe, and that's interesting. It's a great opportunity for us to learn more. At any rate, I'm going to talk about a few areas of law, whether it be competition policy, which Americans call antitrust, network neutrality, which is the regulation of internet broadband services. I'm going to touch very briefly on privacy, probably not say too much about that. And then I'm going to focus on the Digital Markets Act. That's really going to be what we want to talk about today. And hopefully by the time this is over, you might gain an American perspective on this. And I might also gain more information about what I'm talking about, because, you know, when you come from over 1,000 miles away, you really don't know a lot of the actual details. So maybe this would be an opportunity for investigation. So this is the Economist version of this from last year, the Digital Market Act, which, as you know, is current law going into effect even as we speak. The act is meant to create a level playing field on which startups can compete against America's tech titans. Its provision will apply to gatekeepers, a certain type of firm that has become important and some would say dominant in the internet economy. These gatekeepers offer something vaguely described as core platform services. And these are companies with high market capitalizations of 75 billion euros or annual revenues of about 7.5 billion euros over 3 consecutive years preceding, and are defined as being in these market segments. Very specific slices of the economy are being picked out here for special rules. And that's something that's quite interesting all on its own, for the government to turn around and say, well, we've been developing these rules for 1,000, 2,000 years. Now we're going to have really specific rules that don't say anything about firms in general, but firms in particular. And so these are being pulled out here from The Economist. That's their, it's actually much better to quote the magazine than it is the EU itself, which, you know, is problematic, numerous grounds. Anyway, here's the simple timeline. The law was proposed in 2020. It's going into effect right now. And there's going to be actual rules that are being applied as of next year, according to the plan. And fortunately for our talk here in early October, we've had regulators rattle the cage already and put together a list of who these gatekeepers are according to the criteria. I read it out. The law was created that was going to be pretty easy to define who was who. There are no real shocks here, but you'll notice that there are 6 platform economies that are being regulated officially. Now, this is subject to some back and forth. In a certain sense, you say, well, when did the regulation become final? And the answer is, what do you mean by final? So there's never any end of the road on regulation. There's always something else. The best proceeding I ever quoted from at the Federal Communications Commission in Washington was, I believe it started 14th order on reconsideration and other things, but they have these complicated things. 14th reconsideration. This is there's a report and order that's final, but then this is the 14th reconsideration. Anyway, so this is the way regulation works. It's maybe funny to us, but the regulators have a different take. Anyway, so you've got these Alphabet, which is Google, Amazon, Apple, ByteDance, the only Chinese firm, Meta, Microsoft. Where are the European firms? Well, not on the list. They don't qualify as regulated entities. So you might see why Americans are kind of onto this and have been for some years, that the rules seem to apply differently. And there is a protectionist element to it. On the other hand, these are the firms that do qualify as platform, core platform companies. And in fact, the United States now, we'll get to the punchline later, but the United States might see, the regulators might see things very similarly to the Europeans now. So the basic idea is, they say in the South, what's the idea behind that? And it's the Southern United States, by the way. I have to be more specific, I guess. It's not Sicily. They may say it in Sicily, though, as well. So the rules for the gatekeepers are now different. Okay, there's basic law about competition and what firms can legally do. But now we're going to have a different set of rules. And they're going to be quite different for the major firms than the smaller firms or companies just in other sectors that are equally big. So you can have a company like NVIDIA that's got a $1 trillion valuation and is very powerful in the high-tech economy, but they're not a platform provider in the sense of consumer services. So they're left out, and they'll have different rules. And you'll know one actual important point here, or maybe I hope you know it, I'll point it out. That these are all rules about things that now may be illegal that were once legal. In fact, they were so legal that the firms are thought to have violated them to become big, beautiful, giant tech platforms that serve billions of customers very successfully. So the rules that got this innovation into the market are now being, in essence, reversed. And that's not just an interesting kind of artifact. It's actually raises an immediate conflict. And that's this: when you're looking at markets trying to see what is anti-competitive, hurting consumers and lowering innovation, versus pro-competitive, expanding output and creating pretty amazing new stuff, you always want to see, is it a company that's in one particular situation that takes advantage to extract extra gains and hurt customers? Or is it a general strategy that big companies, small companies employ? If it's a small company that has lots of competition and there's no opportunity to have a monopoly game to take over a market and raise prices, then one of the things you might want to conclude is it's efficient. And in fact, the regulators have to accept that logic, and they accept it here implicitly by not making those practices illegal for the smaller platforms. If you don't have 7.5 billion euros in annual revenue, you're not going to have to comply with the rules. Why? Because it's efficient to let you go the way you're going. What causes the switch? Well, the switch has a lot of poetry around it, but to get to the real economics of it, let's try to dig a little deeper, and that's what I'm going to do a little bit during this talk, I hope. So this is a confidence level for regulation that is impressive. I didn't use the word arrogance, not yet, but to think that there are all these kinds of business models out there that were great up until 7.5 billion euros per year in revenue, and now they turn and become anti-consumer, suppressing innovation, supposes that the regulators who are imposing the rules know the right mix, the proper proportions, the correct adaptations of the rules to the new circumstances, and the appropriate adoption of new ideas, how they can break into the market amongst these different size firms in these different sectors. And then in addition to that, it supposes that when there's a violation of the rules that the regulators have set up in this sort of labyrinthic myriad, that the optimal remedies are going to be, at that point, going to be applied by the administrative court or the regulatory agency. So that's the high level. What are the actual things that are being done by these firms like Google or Apple or Amazon that are suspect? Well, the purpose of the law is to provide what's called open access, that a company can't suppress competition from other companies that want to use its platform to provide services to customers to compete. And what might that be? Well, here are 4 examples. This is, the list goes on actually, but these are 4 prime things that I picked out of the rules that are of interest. The Digital Markets Act prohibits a company ranking its own products or services higher than rivals. So Google obviously gives me a ranking when I put in a description of what I'm wanting to search for. They give me a list, page after page, thousands, in fact, of matches, and they get to rank. And a lot of the links that they give me are to companies, to web pages. Some of those web pages are owned by Google affiliates, Google partners, or Google competitors. Does Google have the right to move its results up the ranking list because they have a good economic reason for it, or just avarice? They want to promote their product at the expense of others. The argument here is that they should not be allowed to move them up the list. Open access for all the products out there, Google or Google rivals. There's also a prohibition of bundling. You can't force a company under the rules to say, look, if you want to use our operating system for software, you have to use our application. If you want to use our search engine, you can only get it through our browser. Or if you use our browser, you have to take our search engine. You need to split things up and allow all the competitors in if you have a browser, like Apple has Safari prepackaged on all of its devices. And in Safari, the idea would be that they would have to allow excellent products like Microsoft Bing. That was supposed to be a joke, actually. I know jokes don't translate that well, but yeah, I know some of our, I did that to get one of my friends here who swears now by Microsoft Bing because he says it's been better for the last 20 minutes. But yeah, Microsoft Bing, okay, needs to get access to that Safari, that default search engine. That when Safari pops up, you don't do anything, you don't switch out the default search engine, or you don't search on Bing. You can get to Bing and use it, say on a random rotation with Google search. So bundling is prohibited. There are also mandates. And so the rules say that if you have an operating system for software and you fire up your computer and you have iOS or you have Windows for Microsoft, that it has to freely host any hardware that might go with it or other software applications. They can't have any tie-ins that say you have to use this or that. And another mandate would be interoperability of instant messaging services, very specific to instant messaging. So these are some of the things that are found in the law. And I have to tell you, with each one of these, there's an enormous amount of history and literature that says this is a bad idea. It's just remarkable how you could hit them all in one simple law. And I'm going to give you some of the examples about it now. Now, I will freely admit that in a lot of cases, if not most, it sounds reasonable to say open access. A company creates a platform and everybody can jump on board. And then the customer gets to make a choice between what product is better for that customer. And by the way, where did the regulators get that idea? They got that idea from the market, because the market generally creates platforms where the customers have an enormous amount of choice about how they mix and match the various services. And so if I go on my Google Chrome browser and search Bing, I get it. If it takes a second, there's something wrong with my computer connection, okay? It comes up instantly. And I can search anywhere I want. I don't have to make it a default. I could make it a default if I want. That would take another 2 minutes. But I can use that. I can compare products. DuckDuckGo I've used. It's no problem getting there. There's no foreclosure that's of moment. Now, it's easier with the defaults. The default slots are worth a lot of money. And in fact, in the current Google case, we'll talk a little bit about antitrust in a second, but the Google case is being pursued by the Federal Trade Commission in the United States right now. Makes a lot about the fact that Google pays $10 billion a year to Apple to feature Google search as the default search engine. So that default slot is worth a lot. It's just easier. And there's a partnership between Google and Apple that results in this payment to Apple. Interestingly enough, by the way, Google's being sued for anti-competitive conduct for paying the 10 billion. Excuse me, Google's being sued, yes, for paying the 10 billion. Apple is not being sued for taking the 10 billion. What's the theory behind that? It always reminds me of the situation years ago in Ohio, where the CEO of the largest cable operator in the United States paid a bribe to a mayor of a city to get a cable operation, a cable franchise, and he went to prison for offering the money. But the mayor who took it got off scot-free. I thought between the two, who should be more liable than the public servant or the guy who was just responding to a demand for some money? Anyway. So they have these sorts of questions. There may be a good answer on the antitrust side to why Apple's off the hook, at least so far. But anyway, so these are some of the things. I'll talk about these a little more in a second here. But let me just first state this. All of these regulations are controls over business models. There's two views of the world on this. Companies go out to create valuable platforms. This is the specific instance we're talking about. They want to attract a lot of users, and they want lots of value to be generated. And they always have questions about how much they take on partners and bring in independent software developers and promote the ecosystem around them versus how much they supply internally, how much they favor their own products. There is no platform that is totally private, closed, non-open access. There is no platform that is totally open and without any rules governing what other companies can use the platform to reach customers. There is always coordination, and the level, the nature, and the shape of that coordination is called business strategy. And we're going to see in just a minute here how this works. Brussels is designing markets because they've looked at the markets that have developed. They don't apparently understand how much they didn't know to begin with and how much more they know just at looking at market evolution and how much they owe to that learning process where survivorship amongst the various competing strategies has revealed what customers want and what developers and innovators can give them in very favorable circumstances. And they've jumped in to say, we have the optimal solution, we've seen it, and now if you go past that with a different business model, we're going to bring in regulation. And we're going to fine you as a disincentive to continuing that production. But they have a confidence now about designing these business models and designing these markets, which are quite interesting. And I just want to stress this point that Brussels, like the rest of us, the regulators, I'm talking about Brussels, we all have to learn by observing what actually does emerge in the marketplace and what the competitive forces meet in battle to decide. Competition literally forces different business models. It forces firms not to just have an open platform where anything goes according to the rules that say regulators might push. There has to be a coordination because competition is demanding it, because customers just won't be in that marketplace. And we've seen this develop, in many, many different contexts, but certainly the internet had a lot of poetry in the 1990s about how everything was going to be unregulated and nothing was going to be intermediated. And of course, the social media networks were supposed to have all speech, no coordination, no nothing. Well, that changed a little bit. Okay, now it's they regulate everything. It's a little bit of an overstatement, but there has to be some coordination. You don't, even in the old days of AOL, America Online, the first monopoly, in the words of the Federal Trade Commission, the first monopoly internet service provider. Of course, they had to have a family environment because it was a family service. They wanted to have 34 million households, family households on that system. And so there had to be some regulation. There can't be complete openness. And in fact, these so-called walled gardens develop quite naturally because of competition. How much they open up and allow partners to come, that's a matter of what the incentives are for the partners and what the interests of the consumers are. So you look at this, of course, we can look at the Apple App Store. Apple App Store comes in 2008, just after the iPhone, and it was attacked viciously by advocates of open access regulation. Why? Because if you had an iPhone, you had to buy your content from one place, the Apple App Store. On the other hand, the App Store was tied to the iPhone, which was an enormously popular, it's an iconic innovation. And it was creating this mass market that the developers, the software developers, the independent vendors who were selling their apps, they loved it. They flocked to it. They made a fortune on that system. It didn't fit the Brussels model. It wasn't open, but it was a partnership, and it was dictated to by Apple. And Apple has taken the hits on this, as we'll talk about a little bit later. Anyway, it's very common that in the internet world, there's people paying for preference. There are people paying to get a leg up on the competitors. So even if you know, I'm using examples about browsers like Opera or Firefox. I don't know if you use these. They're competitive in the marketplace. Firefox is nonprofit. Opera, I think they're trying to make a profit, but they take money. How do they make money? What's their business model? They get money from companies like Google to have a default Google search. That's how they make their money. Is that anti-competitive because the provider is determining what the default search engine is? Well, according to the EU, it is anti-competitive, but this is what's keeping competition alive in terms of these upstarts that compete with the major browsers, including those operated by Microsoft and Google. And there's nothing in fact, there's pro-competitive aspects to it because this is what competition is forcing. Anyway, you see the same thing in platforms built by Amazon for the e-commerce bazaar. How do you bring people into that environment? What is the great efficiency of the Amazon platform? Well, there are a lot of ways to put this, but I'm pretty sure it's to eliminate the terrible transaction cost of shopping. It eliminates advertising costs, and it eliminates having to go to stores. Now, I know there's some people in this audience, and you know who you are, who don't understand this. But for much of the world, going to the store is a cost. And going online to Amazon and searching without ever looking at an ad for exactly what you want and getting an array of options and then getting delivery with customer service backed on the other end of that is incredibly productive as an option over alternatives. And to get that audience and stole the slogan of Walmart, which is everyday low prices. It's not a great slogan, but the whole point is to convince somewhere around 1 billion customers that the price you're going to get is good, the delivery is going to be fine, you can return it if you have to, and you're not going to get a better deal that's worth your time to find anywhere else. If you can do those things, you can eliminate a lot of cost, frictions, and you can create businesses for millions, literally millions of small operators, vendors around the world. And if you look at the actual Amazon sales, they do not go to favoring Amazon products. There's been just a straight, we say monotonic increase in the sales of independent vendors. Amazon was 100% of sales in 1997. Now they're down to about 35% of sales. And it's monotonically increased that the independent vendors have taken over. And of course, Amazon has gone from essentially a valuation of 0 to a valuation of close to $3 trillion in the process. So this is the way these markets are working. We're seeing great efficiencies everywhere. And you know that these business models are obvious now, but just look at don't worry about the citations on the page here, but some of these amazingly productive companies like Google and Facebook are free to customers. Now just think about that. Two of these massive behemoth internet platforms, one of them is worth over $2 trillion, the other one gets up to about $1 trillion on a good day. They don't charge customers anything, and yet they serve over 1 billion customers each. And you know what the deal is. The customer says, I give you my data on where I shop and what I buy or what I search for, and free access to search, or you'll give me free access. Okay, that's a very simple deal. Millions of people like that deal. Billions of people like that deal. And what's the value of the free stuff, by the way? Well, we do studies on this. And it turns out that Google's value to the US on the lowest estimates of the value of the free service is about 1% of GDP, about $180 billion a year. That's a flow far in excess of any shareholder gain, any earnings for the company. Facebook is even higher than Google, and it's valued much less, but people really like Facebook. By the way, how do they do it? They do experiments. The Vernon Smith influence. They do experiments where they take Facebook or Google users and they say, if you were to go without your Google for a week, how much would we have to pay you? And they can even do a twist on that. What if there's a 1 in 10 chance you're going to be without Google for a week? Then they don't really have to pay them anything. They just do a drawing at the end. And you actually get estimates of how much people demand to give up their service. And so anyway, so there's this, these folks do it, including this guy, Brynjolfsson, will probably win a Nobel Prize soon, but enormously successful. And these are the suspect services now because people are trading their personal data for free service. Nothing nefarious about it. There's an ideological argument that there's too much, but there are a lot of reasons why privacy is, needs to be better, but the real reasons don't have anything to do with getting ads that you like. Okay, if I get an ad for something I like, I consider it a benefit, right? I don't care about oil of Olay. I want hair care products, but that's just me. So anyway, you can go down the list and see that the actual items that are made illegal under the Digital Markets Act have an interesting history. I'll give you a couple more here, try to do it quickly. The largest merger ever in the history of the world, still 25 years ago and now, was AOL. AOL, the largest internet service provider, 34 million customers. In 2001, buys Time Warner, big media company. And the US regulator said, nah, this is a monopoly, and we're gonna to allow this merger, we have to have some remedies in here. So here's the big remedy. They ordered the new AOL Time Warner to make its instant messaging service open to other companies that wanted to connect, have a Microsoft messaging service that could reach people on their AOL IM accounts. And it turns out that went basically nowhere, but you're not aware of that. Why? Because AOL Time Warner went nowhere and AOL is gone. And wait a minute, raise your hand if you can't get instant messages because there's no interconnectivity with AOL instant messaging now. Raise your hand. Well, it turns out you can get a lot of messages, and guess what? None of those are interconnected either. Okay, if you get a text on your phone, that's one thing. If you get an iMessage from Apple, that's another thing. If you get WhatsApp, okay, they don't interconnect. If you we do a lot of cut and pasting, but they're all Skype. Skype doesn't interconnect to Zoom. WeChat, what?
Not even with kids.
Yeah, that's right. Doesn't even connect to Zoom. Anyway, so apparently nobody ever took a look at this, but they say that you got to have instant messaging interconnecting. It means nothing. Now, yeah, sometimes if you're getting a startup, you say, well, if we could interconnect with everybody and have their scale and not really do a lot of work here, just piggyback on existing services, it would be easier. Well, this is literally the level of the theorizing in Brussels on this. You do want people to actually bring something to the table and make it new and exciting. And in fact, if people are doing this all over the place, if companies come in.
Just reduce biodiversity.
Biodiversity, we got one less, okay. Okay, then the other thing I'll mention is that the classic case in the United States, certainly, but it's I think looked on approvingly in Brussels, is US versus Microsoft, antitrust trial of the century, May 1998. And the US government won that case. We could have a whole fun time on the Microsoft case, but I'll just say this, the government won the case. Microsoft was found to have suppressed competition to its browser by actions it took against Navigator operated software put out by a company called Netscape. And there were rules put in place. Microsoft was not broken up, but there were rules put in place to protect the Microsoft Windows ecosystem such that any new apps could come in and use that ecosystem and compete with Microsoft. Well, they lasted for 10 years from 2001 to 2011. Microsoft still had over 90% market share of the operating system and of browsers, but browsers started really coming in towards the end, have nothing to do with the sanctions in the case. What really happened was, on the one side, yeah, search was taking off and Google was taking over the world in a way that Microsoft, with all of its market power, couldn't do, because it had Bing. Did I mention that? And Zune. So I'll talk about Zune in a minute. Nobody remembers Zune. But yeah, Microsoft, the case had nothing to do with opening up the market. But the emergence of mobile in particular created a different world for internet access. Now, Microsoft, by the way, tried to take over mobile. And what did they do to take over mobile? Europeans should know this. They bought Nokia. Well, that was a good move. They bought Nokia in 2014 and sold it the next year and wrote off $8 billion. They had already partnered with Nokia to begin with. And before that, they had Windows Mobile for many years. It worked, it was fine, but they just got hammered by what? A better product. Okay, I mean, the iPhone, and then Android, which was a response to the iPhone, and Android sponsored by Google, created these two massive ecosystems that wiped out great companies, including Nokia and including the one we all knew and loved, RIM, BlackBerry. Okay, so something better came along. The market was a network market. There wasn't a lot of interconnection about the very items that are supposed to be open to access to make competition work. Okay. Anyway, the last example here, the one I love, well, not the last, maybe one more. Apple iPhone seems to me to be illegal under the entire DMA, because it does not have open access anywhere. Everything is closed off. Now, I said before, there's nothing that's closed off. Of course, there's hundreds of thousands of independent app developers in the App Store, but the access to those developers is through the App Store. And there's a lot of supervision and rulemaking by Apple. It's got an ecosystem. It's the sponsor. You're never in doubt as to who's in charge of that. And in fact, that's what makes it fly. Apple's got the brand. And all the developers want the Apple brand. Why? Because that's the most valuable brand in the world. People want Apple. So this is not open access. And this outcompeted the Microsoft approach, which was much more open access, which has also outcompeted things like, to a great extent, Linux, of course, and some of the real open, but more open environments, but even Android, which is fine for what it is, but it's never been able to achieve the quality and the high-end cachet of the Apple products. Now, the thing this is the last one. This is one I had to go back, and I'm glad you've been reading my old articles, because I've been reading my old articles too. Here's one. So in 2006, in the Financial Times, yeah, this is what I had to scribble about. The iPod comes out in 2003. By the way, 2003. This is the period where Apple was on the rocks. 1997, 98, 2003. There's still, I don't want to make you ill, but you could have been so much wealthier if you put all your money in Apple in 2003. You people are so slow on the uptake. Oh, wait a minute. I didn't either. But yeah, so this little company, little at the time, had been bigger. Apple puts out the music player iPod, and they bundled it with iTunes. You like the iPod? Good. Buy music from iTunes. What are my other choices? iTunes. Okay, this is the Ford, right? The Model A, the Model T. Any color, as long as it's black. And this was an amazing invention, though, and some people noticed it right away, including these very smart guys, one at Harvard Law School, and Tim Wu, who's now at Columbia, Who Controls the Internet. It's a good book. And it pointed out that in the early 2000s, they had these software packages like Kazaa and Napster and Grokster going around, letting people share files. And it was a disaster. There was a junkyard of corrupt files, deliberate fakes, and efforts to advertise porn that made the peer-to-peer experience sharing a major chore. Now, this was also, they mentioned it elsewhere, thievery, the intellectual property issues. People had, artists and creators hated these software packages stealing their intellectual property, their copyright. And Apple solves the problem. And for 99 cents, you're getting your songs. And you're paying the artists. And you don't get bugs and viruses on your computer. And so the European approach, it's a French law at the time, it didn't get to the EU, proposed to ban the bundling. iTunes would have to open up its iPod so that anybody could supply music to it. Now, you can have a theory about it's monopolistic. This company at the time had it's sort of laughable. They were just so tiny compared to all the big players. In fact, who were they competing with? They were competing with not only Kazaa, Napster, and Grokster, but Microsoft, Sony, and Samsung, who were many, many times their size and market cap. And this was the problem that was being solved. This was a bad idea, but fortunately it didn't go very far. And we know the rest of the story now. Okay, the iPod, you think about quaintly, oh, that was a cute little thing. It was revolutionary. And of course, what it led to was that, the entire tectonic plate shift of the iPhone that changed wireless versus wireline and the internet versus pre-internet. And it's, it's just been remarkable. And it's so great for families not to have to talk to each other at the dinner table. So, what's not to like? Well, in the Digital Markets Act, none of this is to like. This is all suspect. This is where you're going to have litigation. It's not too late. Get yourself to law school and start cashing in. This is the only thing to do, because we're all going to be worried about these things for a long time to come. There's no good way to figure this out. It's going to be a lot of process, because there's going to be a lot. There's the law out there now, and there's going to be a lot of guilty parties. Okay, I've just named a few, the most successful firms in the market. And with success in terms of the policy here, they're going to say, oh, see, we got all these targets. Well, now you're going to have to figure out what to do. Here's a picture illustrating the problem. We caught the fish, now what? Well, I thought it was a good illustration. Anyway. Yeah. So that's our 25-year-old. You can see the worm. She doesn't want to touch the worm. She's got the tail. She's just ticked off that daddy hasn't taken the fish and done something with them. So that's what that look is for. And she's just doesn't know what's going to happen. This is my analogy to the Brussels regulators now, that they got the fish, they caught the fish. Now what are they going to do? What are they going to do? They're going to make the world better? I could talk about net neutrality, but you don't want me to talk about that. We can come back to that. I'll finish this off and we can come back to that if we like that. So here's the point, and the point of my title. Anyone seen Europe's Apple? Is that a catchy thing, or you just don't know what I'm talking about? I don't know. That's the, when you do give a talk, and this is not simultaneous translation, but I love the story I told you when President Jimmy Carter gave a talk in Japan that was simultaneous translation. he told a joke that he had never had a good reaction to, and everybody roared in this Japanese audience. So he found the translator later and said, "You got to tell me how you told that joke. It was fantastic. How'd you tell it?" And translator said, "Yes, I told the audience, the president has made a very funny joke. Please laugh." So sometimes they don't come through. But anyway, so here's my joke. Anyone seen Europe's Apple? Well, this is from The Economist last year. Why has one company, SAP, which is about $120 billion market cap, and it's a big company, but it's not a big platform. That's why it's not on the list. Why has SAP remained Europe's top digital firm for so long? And there's nothing else. Why has the continent spawned no trillion-dollar app fell or Amazoni? See? There you go. Okay. Why SAP remains a lonely European presence in digital, lorded over by American tech behemoths, is less obvious. Will the Digital Markets Act help Europe? And they're skeptical. I think they're right to be skeptical. And there's a lot to learn from the way the EU is regulating these platforms. Okay, here's one thing that scares every EU policymaker. I don't see why they don't take this more seriously, but so this is a list of the top 30 firms. It's the last one that's been put out. It used to come out annually. I don't know why we haven't gotten one for 4 years. But anyway, Kleiner Perkins, a big VC firm, puts it out. Top 30 internet firms by market capitalization. Where are the European firms? There are 18 US, 7 Chinese. There's a Canadian, an Australian, an Argentinian. And there is one from, not the continent, Spotify, number 30, from Sweden. Now, this is not the only way to define these firms. In fact, SAP, they're a good firm. They're a spinoff from some IBM X's, but that's fine. It's they've done well in Europe, but Europe's had big companies, and they had them in telecommunications. In the 1990s, some of the biggest firms in the world, particularly in cellular, the emerging cellular market. But it's really gone nowhere. I mean, Siemens is still of some size, but come on, Apple is a phone maker, and their market cap is 2.5 or 3 trillion, and all the action has shifted away. It's just gone away. There are no Apples. And by the way, the telecommunications story, I won't tell it, but there was industrial policy to favor the GSM standard in Europe, and that did great for about 3 years. Second generation 2G, and then it fell apart in 3G because you needed competition to solve the problems that weren't solved by the government picked standard. And that solution came out of San Diego, California, with Spread Spectrum and Qualcomm, what's called the CDMA standard. So competition works, this regulation doesn't. And you can see it in a lot of the data here, the data on startups. This is just something that, Europe, and the incredible thing, of course, world-class education. That's supposed to be the key input. Engineers graduated. Well, Europe does still very well on that metric. Great universities, highly educated workforce, sophisticated markets, and yet they're getting killed by Asia, they're getting killed by the United States in virtually every dimension on this path. So this is one of the great slide titles I've ever had. EU regulators fine at spotting success. Here's a list of all the fines they've levied on US companies. Yeah, they hit Microsoft after the antitrust case. They hit Intel. This is the great one. They hit Intel this year. Intel's spitting blood now, getting creamed by AMD on the competitive front. And Intel got fined for something it did between 2002 and 2006. This year they got fined. There was some new discovery. So these are the punishments they're dealing to these efficient, big, successful firms. Now Google's had its more than its fair share of, what is that, about $7 billion, 7 billion euros. Amazon's gotten hit a couple of times with privacy problems, and then some privacy problems at Facebook. Apple's gotten hit on the sort of the same stuff, which is very funny too, because Apple is really pro-privacy. There's a huge battle between Facebook that is not so pro-privacy. They use your personal data, and Apple that charges you all your money and then respects your privacy. Just a different business model. And it's kind of funny because they always make a big to-do about how moral they are that they don't use your personal data. This is Apple. And that's right. After they have all your money, they don't need to use your personal data. That's the implication of that. But consumers get to choose. And that's one of the reasons Facebook stays out of the App Store, basically. They don't want Apple cutting down their access to the data. Anyway, there's stuff going on against Apple now that may be more of a problem. And of course, Apple, as I said, got hit on its iPod, which is interesting. So the last part of this, here's the ironic conclusion. I say the US is winning the economic race. You say, well, okay, you're an American, you would say that. But here's the other side. The EU is winning the political contest because the arguments out of the EU are now dominant in the US. So good going. And it's funny the way it's coming. You mentioned Biden. Well, this comes too from Trump. Trump's a protectionist. He brags about it. He wants to stop, China and other countries from coming in and stealing our markets. And Biden's come on the back end of that. He's not anti-protection, and he's very opportunistic. So he's going along with this, and they're attacking firms in the United States, right and left. We have lawsuits, antitrust suits. We started with AT&T. Trump lost that case. AT&T trying to, anyway, we're suing Facebook, Google, Amazon, multiple cases against Google. And so here's if you're interested, I had a piece on this a few years ago, but here's the part you need to read. It just doesn't get any better than this when you're quoting a politician. This is Jeff Bezos is worried about me, grinned Donald Trump back in 2016 while discussing Amazon's bald-headed billionaire. He thinks I would go after him for antitrust because he's got a huge antitrust problem because he's controlling so much. President Trump has continued to threaten Amazon and other tech giants with the trust-busting lash. This year on CNBC, informatively announced his role model. The European Union is suing them all of the time. Well, we should be doing this. There are companies. If you can't, yeah, you like that? This is so perfect. Huh? There are companies. Anyway, to leave you something to think about. Huh? You going to be able to go to sleep tonight after seeing that? Huh? Well, we've been going to your art museums. Now you got to see some of ours. Inspired by the best. That's the Caravaggio right there. Anyway, so here it is. Europe wins. The US the regulators are adopting your system, even with respect to net neutrality, perhaps. I could talk more about that, maybe some other time. But anyway, I do want to thank you for putting up with me, and grazie.
Thank you very much. I think that we have a lot of food for thought. We have some time to engage in debate. We have basically a regulation under which every debate at IBL requires open access to the speaker. So you are turned into a sort of essential facility for some time today, and we reclaim a right to free ride on you. So let me see whether anybody's willing to break the ice. Any question? Alberto, use the microphone for those who are following.
So, Tom, it was hilarious, magnificent, and depressing. When it comes to, one thing which is very similar to this, even though it's a different realm of regulation, is the new regulation of the USB-C vis-a-vis the Lightning port for your iPhone charge, which to me is just amazing that you got some legislator that spent months trying to sort it out and imposing that it won't happen. But the funny thing is that your point, where is Europe's Apple? It's a line that would do splendid in Brussels. And the Brussels reaction to you will be, exactly. Where's Europe, Apple? We need to spend European taxpayers' money. We need to regulate the shit out of American companies in order to make it possible for Opera to become, the golden standard. So I think at the end of the day, we are facing something I'd like to pick your brain off. Why it is so difficult to tell people that competition is a race, and race needs winner. And the winner of the competitive game is a win for customers as well, because this is exactly the thing that doesn't go through in Brussels. The Brussels people will tell you, yes, we need a European Apple. This is why we need industrial policy to produce it.
Right. Yeah, well, we have a term in the United States that everybody in politics uses when they're running for office called, they pledge to be committed to evidence-based policy. We're going to look at the facts, we're going to have an appropriate accounting, and then we'll do the right thing, for the public. It comes down to, in operation, policy-based evidence, where they decide on the ends and then they paper it up. So if, an economist has an easy time explaining this, this is, just econ 1 in terms of incentives. If you have the tools of power, the handles and buttons of power, and you can distribute benefits to various constituencies, you're prone to that. And in fact, there are constituencies are very happy to see US companies that are successful be discriminated against. Now, I will quickly point out something, and that is that you fell, not that the US doesn't, other countries don't, you fell very hard for a fake that Microsoft has been behind a lot of the trouble that has been brewing in Europe. After their antitrust case, they got the impression they were, they'd been vaccinated. And in some sense, that seems to be the case. They haven't had the antitrust trouble lately, except up until this last merger with Activision. They had some problems which were kind of silly, but they've ridden them out. They started an entire law firm in Europe to litigate against Google. I know 2 of the partners in that law firm. They're good lawyers. We're good lawyers. One's gone now. But they have helped pave the way for lots of action against the more successful competitors. And there's no question, Google has 93% of search, and Microsoft has 3%. So that's probably time to call that game. There should be a mercy rule somewhere there. But Microsoft is one of those being protected. Now, that makes sense in nobody's world. You haven't gotten anything out of that. They don't deserve to be protected because obviously they can fight for themselves. One of the interesting things, by the way, about this Google case is that Microsoft still puts out most of the software on the computers sold in America. The operating system includes Internet Explorer, or the new one, Edge, and the default search engine is Bing. So I advise you not to get between a woman who's unwrapping her new Dell computer and opening up the keyboard, and as fast as she can possibly do it, change that default search engine to Google, okay? Just don't mess with that process, because people are they're getting no market share on their own violation of open access. So that should tell you something. And the problem here is that the regulators, it is, ideology times rent-seeking interest, and somehow the ideology is on the wrong side of the tracks, and then you've got enough troublemaking brewing, whether it be from U.S. companies coming over and saying protect us, or obviously domestic interests. But how much evidence do you need in this market that it's not working? There are no big tech platforms that have developed under these rules. Try to open that up a little bit more. And it's not like, oh yeah, they're going into chip manufacturing like Taiwan. I mean, there are a lot of countries and a lot of companies that are doing pretty well. Some Japanese companies are doing pretty well. But they have a distinct, antitrust regime that's very protectionist as well, but it doesn't punish the domestic companies that do well. And yet here you're getting punishment of domestic companies that do well, in addition, of course, to the successful interlopers from the New World. It's not a very good answer, but I would just think that the ideology is a real problem and that the evidence needs to be brought to it as well. I will say one thing. I mean, in these markets, people think it's very complicated and it's technical and people aren't going to understand it. And in fact, editors and idea people tend to stay away from really trying to understand these issues very well. And it breaks down usually just on ideological lines, left, right, the normal sorts of things. And people don't really get into it. I would suggest everybody who's not, happy with the status quo, particularly people who see the problems that are being created by the regulatory structures that are anti-innovation, should really make a concerted effort to become more involved and explain these issues in a simple way that can actually improve the public debate. So that's a second non-very good answer, but certainly goes to what I think about.
Leoni, thanks for your lecture. I'm afraid I may go slightly off topic with my question, but basically when it comes to the technological race between the US and Europe, the first factor that comes to my mind, except regulation and policy, has to do more with the brain drain and the mismatch between jobs in technology that are available and the people that are formed in European universities, for example. And I'm not sure if it is a factor that has some actual relevance in this issue, but if it were, it would be a very powerful message for our policymakers, in the sense that the message would be, instead of worrying about regulating the mergers and thinking about ways to interconnect the various services, you need to worry about how you're forming people in order to be in technology and be able to bring about technological change. So I was wondering if this factor has been studied as a possible cause, and how much it counts versus the regulation.
Well, that's a great question, and that's certainly the human capital is the key component in innovation, second only to the legal structure that allows and rewards innovation. And the human capital. Look at Silicon Valley. As soon as I say that, the success of the tech industry, you think of Silicon Valley, you think of the universities there, you think of the attraction of engineers and technically oriented people, particularly young people. One of the remarkable stories about the internet revolution is how it has been driven by young, it's 19-year-olds who will code 20 hours a day. They figured out a way to exploit that resource. And China's done well on that. Silicon Valley's done well on that. There are a few other examples. And certainly the Europeans ought to look at that. Again, they have excellent universities, and they have the opportunity to use that. The fact that they're not creating the employers to put that to work, and innovation and the venture capital, the risk capital to go with that, all the complementary factors should be a crisis. Now, if you go back about 25, 30 years, you'll see that every year the Europeans were having conferences about how to lift research and development investment. They knew there was a gap between the US and Asia on the one side and Europe on the other. And they're bemoaning the fact they're 1 to 2%, US is 3%, and Asia is, I don't know, 29%. But they have the same old conferences, the same old actors, and the same old evidence. And of course, they have tax policies and special deals for particular companies, but you know, you have to look at the evidence that their policy is veered off in a certain way, and that is obviously correlated here with non-result. So I just wrote a piece on the Google antitrust case in the US, and I did think about the labor issue, because there's a lot, this European view of antitrust has come big time to the US. You know, I say you're winning on the political argument. So we have, you mentioned Lena Khan, the Biden administration. I mentioned the Trump administration falling for this. They think it's part of their protectionist program somehow to bash US companies now. It's upside down, but that's where we are. Anyway, in the piece I did, I wanted to make the point that Google has been a bit of a success when it comes to hiring people at high wages. That's supposed to be part of the new antitrust in the US. What do you think? First of all, Google has 200,000 employees, plus or minus. What do you think the median income for a Google employee, not average? Obviously, the top end is 100 billion, so in terms of net worth, but no, I'm talking about the median. The 100,000th employee, how much does that person make? You're 100,000 in. You have any idea? I looked this up. Even I was stunned. $279,000 US dollars per year is the median. Okay. And that's, you know, and that doesn't count there were 1,005 millionaires. My editor didn't know what I was saying. I said there were 1,005 millionaires when they went public. 1,000 people had $5 million in capital value when they went public. How much would that be worth if they didn't sell? $370 million. That's how many. Can you imagine creating 1,000 people with $370 million? Okay. Do you think that's going to keep the brains at home?
Yes, right now we're having a discussion on the minimum wage in Italy,
right?
Specifically for
yeah.
And I think that's a huge factor, because why would you choose to work for a high-tech company that never existed if they pay you 1/10 of what you would be paid in the Silicon Valley?
Right. Well, and of course, when you go to work for Google, you make a lot of money. And then there are few jobs that are better than being an ex-Googler. Okay, then you graduate to an ex-Googler, and the capital, the literal capital you have, and the network you've encountered, and knowing people that go to your Starbucks in Menlo Park is incredible as an opportunity, and not just to work at Google. So it was nothing that was created, of course, but that, you know, to the extent that it was created, it was unemployed aerospace engineers from the 1970s who were just looking for something to do when the tech revolution started in Silicon Valley. But so you don't plan that out. Every place on the planet has tried to be the next Silicon Valley, and you need to get good policies in place that allow these companies to encourage risk, do not penalize success, and have the institutions in place that have people spend time on engineering solutions rather than building up the legal department.
If I may follow up on this quickly, speaking of policies to favor an environment where people can be creative and produce technological advancement, in Europe, I think that there has been lately a tendency to try to create this artificially via policy intervention. For example, there is a lot of popularity of the so-called incubators, where you take public money to build an environment that is half corporate, half university sponsored, in order to put people together and share their brains and create some technology advancement. But I think all of the attempts so far have had little success. So it could be in a way another proof that Silicon Valleys cannot be created by policy. You need to just let people free to be and gather where they want. But this is just a provocation, because it is something that if you see in Milan, it is rather popular, the idea of having these incubator co-working spaces or tenders for winning public money to create startups. And it is quite ironical, because it happens in a country where the level of the quantity of people creating startups is dramatically low compared to other countries with a similar level of GDP. So it's quite fun to see the public trying to make up for this lack of the right environment.
Right. Well, yeah, no, it's sad to see that they won't take on the actual problem, and then of course they'll dish side subsidies to favored groups, to including university administrators, and of course have lots of conferences. I interviewed Tom Sowell in 1980, and I asked him what's the best solution for poverty in America, and he said, you should get all the poverty experts and send them to a conference in Hawaii, and then take away the return tickets for 10 years. And so it makes you sort of think that all the policy solutions they have, you wanted to focus on, basic tax policy, favorable treatment, obviously for capital investments, risky capital investments, not subsidizing them, but not penalizing them. And not engaging in anti-success operations like the Digital Markets Act. By the way, there are a lot of countries around the world that probably will do well on this and can do well. One of the things about Silicon Valley that makes me laugh is I don't think there's any question that its good weather has a lot to do with why it became Silicon Valley. It's a place where when you do have some success and you cash out of your first enterprise, you don't move. And growing up in California and knowing something about New York, my mother was a New Yorker, it always impressed me that people in New York spent an inordinate amount of time trying to figure out how to get out of New York. In the summer, they're gone all summer. Okay, if somebody successful is in New York on a summer weekend, they will lie to you and tell you they're not there. They will stay in their apartment just to convince you they're not there, because it's it's damaging to be seen in the city on a hot summer weekend. Anyway, the point is, in the winter, they're skiing in New Hampshire. They try to get to Europe, of course. But the point is, and then when they retire, they all go to Florida. But of course, Silicon Valley, nobody says, I'm going to go to Silicon Valley, get rich, and then move somewhere, because they were already there. And they'll do their next startup, and they know the folks in the neighborhood, and they want to go use that network to go do their next deal. And so that actually is different than New York's, different than Boston, probably different than Austin too. Although Austin's doing pretty well because of its tax structure. You can see within the United States some of the policies that seem to work, and you need to attract these people. What are these individuals? These entrepreneurs? Where are they moving? Why are they moving? And so that's what people should be focused on. And they should also be focused on the reverse. Why is Europe unsuccessful in the next Apple? Even The Economist is asking that question. That used to be written by economists, didn't it? Remember that? And anyway, so yeah, it's obvious. What's missing? Well, bad policies, I believe. So this DMA seems to be a step in the right direction for the bad policy, and they need to straighten that out.
Any other questions or comments? So let me close with a short point and the final question. A short point picks.
Well, I have another question.
Yeah. Okay.
So you know, I remember there was an old beautiful piece by William Graham Sumner after the Cuban War. It was called The Conquer of the United States by Spain. Because Sumner's point was that the United States won the war, but basically they implemented Spain's policy mindset. And you alluded before to the fact that the US are implementing the European mindset when it comes to regulation now. So if we can somehow forgive Europeans for being oblivious to an understanding of competition for what happened in the United States, can we at the very same time excuse the Americans for not understanding why they are themselves successful?
Well, let's hope so. We need an excuse. I don't know what, I don't know where we're going to go with this, but the good thing right now is that the court system takes a long time to change, and the government's going to be losing a lot of these antitrust cases. We've obviously spent an enormous amount of money on subsidies for things that are going to have no social value. They're just going to be wasteful. Broadband subsidies for rural areas is up to well over $250 billion in the last 25 years, and we keep spending in huge increments now. And we ought to be using satellite for everything in the rural areas, basically, but we can't get that transition, which was a cheap transition. But at any rate, these things happen politically because why? It's politically wired to have, to have certain distributional outcomes. And so, as I like to see, when in the United States, every airport I ever go to is under construction. We have construction projects everywhere. And people say, when's the construction going to be finished? Somebody asked that at an airport recently. And I said, ask the vendors, the contractors, they'll tell you when it's going to be over. And the answer is never, of course, because that's what the program is for. It's to figure out a way to get the unions and the businesses that contribute to the certain projects to, keep them employed, or at least looking like they're employed. So yeah, there's a lot of transaction costs, as we say, overhead with that regulatory stuff. And I as an economist, I'm not looking for a perfect world, but it is frustrating. It has to be frustrating, particularly for Europeans who say, well, why can't we do this? Looks like a good idea. Why you're getting the lawsuit ready and you're fining these companies, but maybe we can have an Intel. You can't even get an Intel over here.
Spending lots of money subsidizing Intel.
Right. Well, for Intel production, yeah. Well, so you can get Intel, one piece at a time. Yeah. Yeah. Well, Intel's going into that. Yeah, going into that side of it. It's sad to see that, but we got the CHIPS Act that's supposed to be doing the same thing in the U.S. So that's why you're here. That's your job. This is the Bruno Leoni Institute needs to straighten this whole mess up. Yeah.
An interesting thing about not necessarily DNA, but all of these new subsidies, a new kind of European industrial policy, it is actually the US. Most of the new thing that Brussels is picking up, including the Italian or the European version of the CHIPS Act, they come out of the fact that the Biden administration had them. And so, and basically for the first time, it is, look, the European regulator is thinking that as opposed to what the Biden administration is doing, we are not interventionist enough.
Yeah.
And, this is the quagmire in which we are.
Yeah. Well, yeah, there's, you can always design more markets, and there's always an argument for doing more of it. And of course, you can always say, I'm going to do it better next time. But we've been through many iterations. It's not all that promising. Yeah.
So you have a short story and the final question. The short story picks up on Alberto's first question, actually.
I'm going to take a picture of the audience.
The Italians here may remember that a few years ago, the Italian government spent quite a few of the taxpayers' money to subsidize Poste Italiane, which is the state-owned mail monopolist, to start a quote Amazon for the made in Italy, end quote. Mm-hmm. Now, the funny part of the story is that if you just Google Amazon for the made in Italy, the first result you get is Amazon, which has a specific page designed for the made in Italy products. But the even funnier part of the story is that Amazon's page for the made in Italy products is subsidized by the government. Which makes up for the craziness we are living in. But my final question is this one. Well, final as long as there aren't any more. We are a policy-oriented think tank. We have tried to counter the DMA and the likes, but as it often happens, we lost our battle. It is, however, probable that a few years from now, people will start asking whether it did or did not work. So which kind of metrics do you suggest to look at in order to argue whether or not it did work?
Well, you should spend some time thinking about that. It's a great question. The simple answer is you want competitive expansion of the economy, and you want to try to, it has to be a but-for analysis. If you didn't do the DMA, what would have happened in the absence of that? That's where it gets difficult, generally speaking, because you don't see the counterfactual, except in other countries. That's why international comparisons are important. I certainly have made a comparison with the U.S. market. You might want to do it across different markets. Maybe you say are more apt to look at, rather than the American market, maybe the Canadian market or the Japanese market or whatnot. But you want to look across markets, and you want to try to make a plausible analysis that shows you what happened differently because of the DMA, and where incentives were different. How did things get better or get worse? And obviously you have to keep an open mind. You have to, Karl Popper, had the falsification standard. It has to be a real test where you could win or lose in terms of your hypothesis. So that serious work can be done by scholars here in Italy and elsewhere, and I would welcome that. This is some of the work that I try to do with economists and other scientists in the United States, and it's why they pay the economists the big bucks, as we say, or not, as the case may be.
Okay, so thank you very much. Grazie a tutti quelli che ci hanno seguito in presenza o da remoto, e ci vediamo la prossima volta. Buona serata. Thank you very much.